now we move on to the second story in Full Dark No Stars, which is Big Driver, which is King basically telling a story that has quite a bit of power behind it, while using a very sort of recognizable plot line, with just going for the revenge story, pretty much. And of course, I talked about how, when I talked about Riding the Bullet in the last series when we were doing the short stories, I said that we'd eventually get to Big Driver, and a little sooner than I had anticipated. So, here we are. And I was talking about how The Langoliers kind of suffered from being a TV movie, and this goes the extra route. This isn't just an average, ordinary, everyday TV movie. Somehow, somebody thought it would be a great idea to take Stephen King's very brutal, very explicit novella and make it a Lifetime movie, which sounds ridiculous if you just say it that way, but it's actually got quite a few things in it, and the subject matter in general, that kind of fits the brand in a certain way. Because we do have the whole thing how at the surface, obviously it's the whole woman is assaulted, woman comes back, woman gets a gun, takes revenge, the end. A very, very classic sort of revenge story, but there's a lot of certain details and the way we see the story pretty much through her perspective, in King describing the ways that she reacts to certain things, or the sort of scenario she plays out in her head of how things might go. And it kind of becomes this whole thing about not just being able to really put an audience in the shoes of somebody that suffered like rape or abuse or whatever it may be, and then the consequences of that. And what they feel in regards to the fear in it, and how it can make you like think something is around every corner, and just completely put your life in this off balance and makes an ordinary everyday life into this terrifying thing. And so there's definitely something there, and like I said, you can sort of see aspects of both, like somehow King and a Lifetime movie have collided here, and it's not that weird. So there's that, and props to the movie also for, even though they're a Lifetime movie, quite a bit of the brutality of the story is still intact. Obviously there's some things that they never would have gotten away with, but quite a bit of it is still here. So that can be really surprising also. And we also get it, a particular moment talking about, where I was talking about scenarios where it's like, she imagines not necessarily just being not believed, but also being dismissed after reporting what happened to her. Or the fact that they might say things like, like it was her fault, or something like that. And it's like, they're saying a lot of things about that, even though on the surface it's just this revenge movie. Which is, of course, what, the main focus is, but every now and then he'll throw those things in there without being too overbearing, or almost like they're trying to do like a message movie or something, which can sometimes hinder what a movie is trying to say if they go a little too far into it and basically wear a neon sign that says, "Hey audience, this is what we're doing. This is what you're supposed to think this means." It just kind of gets us there and kind of shows it to us, but it comes through a lot more in King's text than it does in the movie itself. The movie does mostly come off like an average revenge movie, with a few of those things, like the her fault thing, is portrayed in the movie also, where she kind of has that sort of thing where it's like, she should really be mainly focused on like, this could have potentially ruined my life, this is going to make me terrified of everything, probably every guy I meet, every corner I go around, forever. But there's still that other part of her that's like, how will other people perceive this? Which is a shame, but it's there and it's real, so obviously it's also being said. But as far as this goes, our main actress is Maria Bello. And it's clear that she's a good casting choice, but that's also the case of, it's a matter of which Maria Bello we're going to get. Because overall, like in general, Maria Bello is a great actress. Like, not good, like great. But the thing is there are also times where she can go way over the top. Which are cases that are not so great. But for the most part, she could absolutely pull off a part like this. Like she's like, there's something about her previous performances before this to where it's like, it almost feels like a no-brainer to approach her for this part. Um, so when she first goes to the book signing, in both movie and novella, you get a sense of, obviously so many Stephen King protagonists are also authors. So there's obviously some stuff that King is getting out there and stuff, like maybe he's like, it can give him a certain perspective on this character, but it can also, like, maybe he's putting out some grievances or something. So we go through this whole thing where Tess often deals with people asking where she gets her ideas from. And it's like whenever he approaches something like that, you can tell it's like King saying, like, this is what I deal with every time I go to one of these things. It's like just the same stupid questions over and over again, and the same process and all that. And every now and then there's a little, there's some things thrown in there that I don't know if they're intentional or not. One line that's in the movie that I don't remember in the story, because it might not be in there, is that her friend saying, you know, oh, I can't wait, your stories should absolutely be made into movies, and they should have Oscar-winning actors and everything like that. And that line is funny, of course, because she imagines the main character of her novels throughout the movie as Olympia Dukakis, and of course Olympia Dukakis is an Oscar winner for Moonstruck. So technically it already came true in the movie. And yeah, we'll get more into that technique that they used in a second. But when she is at this book signing, of course she's got to meet Ramona, the person that gets her into this whole mess in the first place, who is perfectly cast. The perfectly cast and out. Where it's like, when you're reading the story, it really does not occur to you in the moment at all that Ramona might be shady. But it's like the second you see Ann Dowd in the movie, you're like, Ramona's shady. Ramona's absolutely shady because Ann Dowd always plays that to perfection. And it doesn't even necessarily feel like typecasting. It's like, if somebody's good, go for the best. So good at a particular thing. So there is something though about when we do reach, once again, much like 1922, very quickly get to the turning point, the turning event of what pushes this story in another direction, in the direction that we're going. And obviously it's very brutal and detailed in the story, especially since we're kind of, through King's text, we're able to be inside her head and know every single detail about what is going on and what is happening to her. And of course, not only would really any movie show it in that graphic detail, but this is a Lifetime movie, so it's going to be more watered down than a typical movie would be. Like I said, not as much as you would think. But for a subject matter like this, yeah, so you've got to portray to the audience, and give them like this disorienting feel, that King so perfectly portrayed in the text. So, the problem is that it's a TV movie. And, as I've said way too many times before, to the point that I'm gonna puke if I have to mention it again, there is a certain style that both made-for-TV directors and straight-to-video directors take on. But it's like, I feel like there is a separate film school for directors that make TV movies or straight-to-DVD movies. And that is, always be flashing shit, do shaky cam a lot, and all this other obvious shit, annoying shit, when you're trying to be disorienting, or, you know, give the audience a shock or whatever. And so you just know that when we have this stuff that we can't quite show too much on camera, why not just do it in this fashion? It's like you'll disorient the audience and you don't have to show too much. It sounds semi-smart on paper, but it is very annoying and predictable shit that needs to die. So, so obviously we have, like, you know, visions and voices and all this stuff, and it's also in the story in a way where when you're reading it, you're like, this will never translate. Like, if you tried to translate this directly, this would be, it would come off like a really shitty straight-to-video movie, or maybe a TV movie. Um, so it's like when we get to the point also, like when she starts to hear different like things, like she's because we were talking about the duality. That's revisited a lot throughout Full Dark No Stars. Like we talked about the conniving man in 1922, and here Tess does the same thing, where she has Tess and then she has post this event Tess, that sees the world from an entirely different perspective and is willing to kill and do other things. And to the point that the movie visualizes this quite literally by showing her outside, outside the window, watching this happen to herself, for symbolic reasons. And it's like, in that sense, I can kind of see it translating, because, I mean, it's very literal, but it's not too in our face, I suppose. But you do have stuff like when the GPS Tom starts talking to her. And it's like, or when you see Olympia Dukakis around, who is the main character in her novels, who's kind of like there as her physical voice of reason. Or the scene at the end when she kills the wrong brother and his body starts talking to her. And it's like, this is another case of, if you've read the story, you know, but it's like, I feel like if I hadn't read the story and I saw Big Driver, all of that stuff would be really confusing to me, I feel like. Like I said, I was lucky enough to know what was going on because of the story, but the way they translate it to the screen, I feel like is... Obviously, I'm speaking for the people that did see it without reading the story, but I just have a feeling that had to have been really confusing for those particular audience members. So that was a hard thing to try to pull off, and I suppose they could have gone, you know, more outlandish, because obviously in the story also her cat starts talking to her as well, and it kind of comes off in like a like there's the movie The Voices, where Ryan Reynolds' animals talk to him and convince him to kill people and stuff like that. And there's like it sort of reminded me, I was like, when I was reading the story, it's like you probably could translate this like the scene in Three Doors Outside Ebbing, Missouri, when Frances McDormand has gotten to the point where she's like, we're gonna take this as far as we can take it. And this scene happens by, she's making her slippers talk to each other in different voices. And like I said, it sounds weird to say, but in an execution like that scene, it is able to work. Cause one thing is you got Frances McDormand doing it. But also because it's like, you can just see like how that's where her mind's gotten to this point, and how you can tell it's like what it is exactly that they're going for. And in another case, that would just seem really bizarre and off-putting. So I do feel like if we had, like, you know, the talking cat in the movie, that might have been one step too far. I don't remember her hearing her cat's voice. As far as I remember, maybe it did happen, but I don't remember it happening in the actual movie. So there is that. But talking about, I do want to go back to what I was talking about with the event itself and us being able to see it in her head in King's text versus from a more audience perspective that the movie gives us. And now, obviously, there's going to be some impact lost here, because when you look at the way it's portrayed in the story, it's very... I mean, these scenes are present in the movie, but it feels way too rushed. It doesn't give enough, like, of that suspenseful feel and put us in her position of anything could be deadly at this point. So there's the really great sequence in the story where she's walking down the road, and now, okay, so she's just been attacked, she's been left for dead. This is beyond the term attack at this point. And so she is able to get out of the pipe, where she sees that other dead bodies are laying, to further, you know, explain to her, they think you're dead. He thinks he has killed you, so this might as well be you rising from the dead. So she needs help right now. Like, God knows whether she could be concussed, God knows what damage has been done to her body. So, when you're in this kind of scenario, the very first thing you want is help, you would think. So, because it's dark, and the only thing she can identify in the dark is headlights, coming down the road, which in any other situation, in any other scenario, would be savior. Would be, this is exactly, like, you would feel like it was like heaven shining a light down on you, saying you will live. And the relief and everything should be washing over you when you see a pair of headlights. But because she doesn't quite know when she sees a pair of headlights, it is literally the exact opposite. She has to retreat from what could potentially be help, but she's not quite sure. And it's like, because you can't risk that being him, you have to run away and hide from potential help every time it goes by. And it's like how just adding on to the soul-crushing scenario this already is, that you have to retreat from what could normally be seen as your savior, just really piles on to all this in a really big and effective way. And that also goes into, like, just seeing other places, like seeing places lit up, like, oh, there's potential sanctuary. But it's like, you don't know where he is. He could be there. And, like, that's that thing where he really sets up, even when she goes home, it's like any corner of darkness in her house. Because the thing that she really gets stuck on in the story that's terrifying is he still, like, she never retrieved her purse, so he probably has it. Meaning he has her ID, which has her address on it. So all of these things that would otherwise seem paranoid, everything adds up in your head like that something could realistically happen all over again, resulting in your death. And it's like, even when she gets home, there is no safety. Like, every dark corner or every, other room you go into, behind every door or whatever, something deadly can be there. And for a lot of people, after an attack like this, that just becomes life. And it's, like I said, the way it's portrayed in here by King, in this story that just seems like your usual typical revenge story, is like really, really effective and really, really terrifying. So, on top of that also, we do have some interesting, like, for a TV movie, there's some interesting shots in it. Some inspired shots. Like, we've got her, when we see through the GPS, when Ramona's telling her where to go, and the GPS dissolves into her driving on the road, is a really nice shot, particularly for a TV movie. But there's also this scene, this kind of fake-out scene, that feels kind of like a classic sort of misdirection thing, is when she's at the gas station, and we have this shot from inside the garage that looks abandoned, and it looks like a point of view shot, like from down low, like she's being watched, and it's just sort of lingering, and then we get a shot of her with the garage in the background, and there's nothing there. And like, that kind of gives you that idea that something is looming, even though he's like not even there in that moment yet. And so I thought that was really effective also. But then you have some things that I'm surprised are in the story, but they also cut out. Like the usage of movies. I really love the idea that one of the main clues that Ramona is shady and potentially insane is that she loves Richard Widmark. But it's not just that she loves Richard Widmark, because Richard Widmark played all these different kinds of roles in his career. But no, she specifically loves Richard Widmark in Kiss of Death. Which is an amazing Oscar-nominated performance from him, where he plays this psychotic criminal that's pretty much like, I feel like any of the psychotic standout side characters in movies have their basis is Richard Widmark in Kiss of Death. And the fact that this is the performance she takes to, and that Tess is able to put that together, it's like, it's really bizarre that performance in particular is the one that she's into. Like, it's kind of a stretch, but it's a King story. We tend to just accept stretches to go on, because the mystery of Big Driver can seem very convoluted. It's like she jumps to conclusions really quickly. And I suppose we're supposed to go along with it because she's a mystery writer, so this is what she does, I guess. But it's, in the story anyway, it's easy to just kind of go along with it. Even though if it's like, wow, we jumped to this room. Like, she comes to the conclusion so quickly that Ramona is bad, that when you first read it in the story, you think maybe it's like it's going to eventually be a dead end, and then she'll have to investigate something else. But it's like, nope, it's Ramona. It's just that simple. There is a segment, though, that I'm guessing a rights issue, because what's interesting is she actually does watch Kiss of Death in the movie. But something they took entirely out of the story was she takes main inspiration from, of all things, The Brave One, the Jodie Foster movie. And there's like a whole thing where she goes to Blockbuster, she checks it out, and she watches it, and she like takes notes. And she ends up, if I remember correctly, she didn't even find Kiss of Death. She has to watch Kiss of Death clips on YouTube, is what it is. But in the movie, she's just watching the movie, so that's interesting to me for some reason. I don't know why. Yes, so eventually we get to the point to where she's ready to confront Ramona. And so we have this great moment. And like I said, this also feels like it's coming from a certain place in King. And it's this really great moment of, like, I don't know if it's completely intended as humor. I feel like from King's perspective it was intended as humor. Maybe the people adapting the movie, I'm not quite sure. But Ann Dowd still delivered it perfectly, so I would think they had some sort of idea. Because every now and then there is a glimpse of humor in the story. Like when, like Tom's voice is sort of like her familiarity, her sort of safety zone. So there's that moment when she's being carried by, what's his damn name, Lester, and she's having like these thoughts in her head like, what's happening to me? And it's like, where is everything? Where's the car? Where's everything? And the line is, wherefore art thou Tom? Wherefore art thou Tom? And it's just this weirdly bizarre, kind of funny line within this extremely scary situation where she might be on the verge of death any second now. And then there is a similar moment when she is confronted with Ramona, and she's pulled a gun on her. Ramona has managed to get the gun away from her and point it at her, and she goes off on Tess, and she's trying to really get down to Tess, because Tess has figured her out, and now she's basically working on both rage and fear that she's been found out, and that has been confronted by this person that's supposed to be dead. And the way she just gets down to the nitty-gritty of trying to hurt her, she says, "You're a terrible writer, and your plots are pedestrian." It's like, that's just the perfect piece of humor that this scene needed. That's how Ramona attacks her verbally. Because she knows that's where it's going to really hurt. Then, like I said, you can feel that probably coming directly from King as well. One aspect that, once again, it must be, I guess Fox didn't want to give them their movies, but, everyone's Warner Brothers, but, The Sound of Music is playing on the TV in the book when she confronts Ramona. And I don't know, for some reason, I guess it's because of the family aspect, I thought that was the most amazingly borderline sadistic detail. That Ramona's just in her house watching The Sound of Music, knowing that in her mind, her son is just out there raping and killing women. And this is what she does, is she sits, she eats junk food, and she watches The Sound of Music. And the same thing for when she confronts Lester at the end of the story, he's just watching Seinfeld. But of course, the movie had to make things a bit more climatic and action-y or whatever. So we do get more of that, like more of an action climax here. Like the scene with Ramona pretty much goes as it does in the story. But with Lester, of course, he's not in the house, he's outside, and they have to have more of a scuffle. She has to... I do like the detail of hitting him with the board with the nails in it, in the head, because the boards with the nails are what started this whole thing, what flattened her tires and got her stuck with him. So that was a cool detail that the movie added, to kind of bring it full circle and kind of bring the karma all the way around. I still think it's a bit, I mean, either way, it's an anticlimactic story, I guess, both in the story and the movie. But I kind of like the way it happens anticlimactically in the story, because there's just more of a realism to it that way. Like, it feels, like, because of the whole, and like I said, I'm not one of those people that's all about, like, everything has to be realistic or otherwise it's not as good. But because the story is already so grounded anyway, just to add another sort of realistic nature to the climax of it just adds all the more to that, thus making it more terrifying the more realistic it is, and the more believable it is. And then there's a whole, and then by the end, the movie's just ready to end after he's been killed. Because there's kind of a bit more that the story has, because we get the whole thing where she sits in the kitchen, she contemplates, writing a whole confession, kind of like Wilford did in 1922, and then ending it with suicide. But then she basically has the characters in her head talk her out of it, and then she goes, and then there's the character Betsy, I think is her name, that's played by the stunt casting choice of Joan Jett for some reason in the movie. I don't know what the hell that's about, but... and that character is interesting because it does sort of give... Like, the conversation between her and Tess is good in both the story and the movie. Like, it's a good scene, too. But the fact that it comes full circle in the story, and it's like, oh, well, she's a loose end, and then they meet up again, and it might seem kind of stretched out in the story, so I could kind of get if they wanted to cut it out or at least trim it down. And it's like, I figured it out and you did the right thing and all that stuff in the end. But the movie kind of took a weird approach to this, because it's like, they almost make it seem like, I mean, I guess it could seem clear enough if you know what the ending of the story is, where she calls her up and she says, hey, good job, I know what you did, and then she hangs up. And you get the sense that that's all it is. It's her just saying, hey, I know what you did, and good job, secret safe. No loose ends with me, don't worry. But the way it's done, like where it ends immediately, where the way she says her name, like she's shocked about this, it almost makes it feel like it's ending on a cliffhanger of sorts. Where, like, I feel like some people might have watched this on Lifetime and didn't know if that was a threat or not. Even though when you read the story, it's very clear, but, yeah, so I feel like that ending of the movie might almost give the audience the wrong idea of what the ending is. But, yeah, so that was just weird. So, I mean, as far as, a TV adaptation and a Lifetime adaptation at that, like I said, they do more than you probably think they would, and are able to go into it more than they would. And like I said, because the territory is kind of their wheelhouse, so it has that in its favor. And like I said, there are these techniques every now and then. There is one big jump scare that's actually surprisingly effective from like a TV movie like this, when the arms come out of the medicine cabinet. Like, that might seem cheap, but the fact that there's not really anything else like that, at least that I remember in the movie, makes it a lot more effective and worthwhile to be there, so... Yeah, so once again, this is another case of, when you're doing King as a TV movie, there's only so much you can do, and you're going to have to water down stuff, and is that going to affect it? Usually, probably. But some things can get past it. Like, I've often praised the It miniseries, even though it obviously had to be watered down, and a lot of stuff had to be cut out. But it's a lot more faithful than people give it credit for. And you could say the same thing about these other TV adaptations, but there's just something about the execution that never quite... Like, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of layers to King's stories, no matter what they are, that adaptations like this often miss. So when they're just kind of more about being the entertaining thing that's literally just on TV, like you can just flip to it because it's made for TV, or flip away from it if you feel the need to, so... You do kind of ultimately just get that sort of vibe from it, but it does better than you might expect it to if you have a certain prejudice towards made-for-TV stuff, like I maybe somewhat kind of do, so... So yeah, we have one more story we're going to tackle in Full Orc No Stars, with A Good Marriage, which was adapted in 2014, I think. So I think that's the same year Big Driver came out, if I'm not mistaken. So, then we'll talk about that, and then we should just have one more left, I think, and then that'll be it for this. So until that, I think that's it for